Look amazing, by the way.
All right, awesome.
Okay.
So let's just dive right in. Let's talk about how you got to Iowa State.
Okay, wow. All right. Okay, that's a big full question. Do you want me to start all the way back through my high school career?
Let's start back at your introduction to basketball and how that got you to Iowa State, how scouts found you, and how Iowa State said, "We want you on our roster."
Okay, great. This is a very loaded question because I have a couple of stops along the way, if you remember. So my very first introduction to basketball is actually a really interesting one. My dad was basically my best friend growing up, and my main coach throughout basketball. And so one of my very first memories of playing basketball, it was like a Saturday morning. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And when you're that age, you just want to watch cartoons in the morning, the Saturday morning cartoons. It was before all this like cool technology. But I remember watching cartoons, and at some point my dad shut off the TV and goes, "Go outside, take your basketball with you." I had basketball, soccer ball, tennis rackets all over the place. But, for that moment, I really just wanted to watch cartoons. So I grabbed my basketball. I didn't have a hoop at my house at all, but there was one across the street at an elderly neighbor's house. So I took my ball, being stubborn at 8 or 9 years old, and I sat on my basketball and I stared back at the house. So it was across the street. My dad opened the front door and he looked at me, and then he shut the door, and then that's all I remember. So he was happy that I was out of the house, and I sat there for a couple more minutes, and then finally I picked up the ball and I started shooting. And I was like, man, I kind of like this. So that was my very first introduction to basketball. And, fast forward years later of even being able to be drafted in the WNBA, it's kind of a cool experience to look back and all the memories that I made with my dad and my parents throughout that time.
So do you think it was your dad that primarily pushed you in the direction of basketball or sports in general?
No, he was an elementary school principal. So he knew about, getting outside, and, the time that you play is the biggest time that we had. And I was always a very curious kid. So I would ride mountain bikes throughout the neighborhood. I would like ride down to the river and just kind of play by myself down there. Basically my first love was actually soccer. And so I ended up playing in third grade with like a Olympic development team, but it was made full of boys. So I played soccer with boys nonstop, even traveling teams. And again, I grew up in Iowa, so I would travel to Peoria, Illinois, and Bloomington, Illinois, with this all guys soccer team. And that's all I really kind of knew. And that was about 3 days a week of practice and then weekend games. So that was my first love. And then I was introduced a little bit more into basketball, where I was able to play on an all girls traveling team as well. And it just started to be a lot where, I was practicing 4 or 5 days a week for different sports. And I was, again, only third or fourth grade. And my parents were kind of looking at like, hey, we can't keep this up all these days for so long. And I actually kind of chose basketball. It just seemed like there were a lot more opportunities at that time to play basketball, whether it be in high school or in college, all the way up. So that's how I kind of actually ended up playing basketball. But I had so many interests throughout, whether it even be astrology. I'd go to do star camps and, horseback riding camps. So anything I could get my hands on, I dove right in, and I was just extremely curious and wanted to see like what everything was about, just kind of immerse myself into different activities.
So I was the same exact way when I was little. I could not pick a single individual activity. I had to be involved in everything. So I completely understand that. How did you land on basketball specifically?
All right, I just changed my view real quick. So let me think. On that traveling basketball team, so I was probably in 6th grade, and it was a very fortunate time where we were able to play in the AAU like state championships, and we won that, and then we're able to play in the national championships AAU tournament, which is incredible because I got to go see teams from Minneapolis and New York and California and Texas and New Orleans and all of these huge cities and huge states that had girls that were, 6'2", 6'3" in the 6th grade, playing basketball. And so that really kind of opened up my world of what is possible. And at that time, I was probably, I don't know, 5'6" or so. And I was playing a post position, for all of you guys that know basketball out there, which is like kind of the Shaquille O'Neal down on the block. But these kids were so much bigger than me. And I just remember, wow, I was like, I have so much more to like prove and to like set my goals so much bigger. So that was one of the biggest things. I remember the tournament was in Terre Haute, Indiana, playing there. And I came back and really kind of stuck my nose into basketball. And shortly after that, in the 6th grade, I received my first collegiate Division I letter for recruiting. So I was 11 or 12 years old at that time. And my gym teacher gave me this letter. So they were kind of right back to back between the national, tournament, AAU tournament, and then receiving my very first recruitment letter. And I just, at that point, I remember walking to my locker and opening it up in my locker and seeing like that they had seen me play and they wanted me to, possibly consider their university in the future. It was the University of Northern Iowa. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So that opportunity just kind of set like my goals so much further up for me. And so I was really able to kind of set my dreams in place from that moment forward, and where basketball just wasn't a fun activity. It was something I was really inspired by to like be the best at.
So when you were in middle school, already getting collegiate activity, what was that feeling? I mean, you were learning English and social studies and looking at the future of playing basketball collegiately. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen at the same time for most people. So how did you juggle everything?
Oh, it was a wild time for sure. I was so fortunate that I was able to play on such a great AAU team and have friends who also were just as committed to basketball and really wanted to play on the weekends. All the tournaments in the summertime were, a lot that I was able to play. But I really just kind of kept setting my sights on the next goals, like, whether it be how am I doing at the free throw percentage, or can I make, can I do a crossover dribble to the left and do a great jump shot? So I really kind of set my sights on the big vision, but every single day I'd come into the gym and I just would start, at the basics, whether it be dribbling a figure eight as fast as I can, trying to work on my ball handling, because again, I had played more of a down low position. So that was a big thing to like set my goals big, and then kind of every day just kind of chip away at them, whatever that looks like on the court.
So then you get to high school, and I would assume that more offers are coming in. How did you land at Iowa State from there?
Right. So so when I got to high school, I started off my freshman year, and I think I'm coming in on a great team. I played in the largest class division. So we had about 500 people that would graduate in my class. So that was the largest 4A class for the state of Iowa. And we were coming off and playing the former champions of that. For my very first game, it was a Des Moines Dowling game. And I was a freshman starting on the varsity squad. And I come out there thinking we're going to have a great shot. I've never played with any of these people before. They won't know, the other team won't know, how to guard me. Well, I come out and they put on a box and one. And so what that means is they played a zone for the rest of the team, and they had one person face guarding me the entire time. And that was my introduction to high school basketball. So from that point forward, I pretty much had one or two people trailing me every game throughout the rest of my high school career. But I had great teammates. I had an awesome coach who believed in me and gave me the opportunity to play. And even that freshman year, I broke the state scoring record, the first freshman to ever lead the state in scoring in an 80-year history. So it was, even with all that defense, I just kind of kept shooting, kept trying to, win as many games as possible. And it was just a fun experience throughout all of high school. And during those summer tournaments, I played in front of a lot of college coaches, a lot of like Pat Summitt, Ariyama, all these college coaches come to watch these AAU tournaments, playing at the Nike camp. There's all these scouts. And so every time we'd play throughout the summer, you'd have people watching you. So yes, all the letters did start flowing in. And it was just a really great opportunity to look and kind of create your future of what you really wanted to do and what school you wanted to go to.
So how many other schools were recruiting you when you left, when you were looking at leaving high school?
I'm not quite sure on the number of collegiate programs. You know, my parents ended up keeping all of the different letters that would come in, the uh, different playbooks, program, media coverage, whatever it was that was sent to the house. You know, there were Rubbermaids full of those. But I was able to, you know, narrow down. I had posters all over my wall of, you know, different players and programs that I wanted to be at. So I was able to narrow my focus down to 5 schools. So when you're a senior in high school, you get 5 official visits to universities. And I think my final 5 were Illinois, Iowa State, Duke, Purdue, and Stanford. So I was able to go out for 5 different weekends, you know, go and see their program, visit their campus for 48 hours, and hang out with the players there. So those are my final 5. And out of those 5, I did end up choosing the University of Illinois. And that was where I played for my very first freshman year.
And then, so you play for the freshman year. What happens at that point to get you to transfer?
Sorry, I'm getting my charger real quick. And I know you
Okay.
edit these, so. I realized I didn't plug this in. So, okay, your question is that after my freshman year, what happened there?
Yeah. So
Okay.
what happened during your freshman year to facilitate some kind of transfer?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And, you know, now that I've been removed from the collegiate scene for quite a bit of time, I've been able to have some perspective on it. And during those years of high school, you are being recruited by, you know, at 16, even, you know, like I said, 11 years old, but most of the time about 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, you're talking to college coaches nonstop, whether that's email or the back and forth letters, and then during the timeframes that they can call you. But it's a business, you know, that the college sports is a business, and it's just as much for the coaches and the team to win as it is for players to actually perform. And so what ended up happening that freshman year is we had the second best recruiting class in the nation, but we just weren't able to gel as good as we possibly could. So during that year, I used to be a jump shooter, I should say. So I shot a lot of jump shots, 3-pointers. I would come off the ground like Michael Jordan, if you ever see him. And the coaching staff there really wanted me to be a set shooter. And it was just such a change of fundamentals for me in all of the years I had practiced. And so when I ended up transferring, I actually couldn't shoot a 3-point shot. I know that's hard to believe, you know, considering all of the years that you put in. But just mentally, just couldn't shoot the basketball anymore because I was looking between a set shot and a jump shot. And I just, you know, mentally couldn't quite get it there. The team didn't gel that year either. So there was many of us that actually ended up transferring out of the program. And I did transfer as well. So I went to Iowa State University, which, you know, is in Ames, Iowa. I loved the experience. And one of the reasons why I chose that program is because out of all of the women's basketball programs, they had the 3rd best attendance. And so if you think of UConn women's basketball or Tennessee, University of Tennessee women's basketball, they play in front of 10,000 or 15,000 fans. And that's what Iowa State had, is 10,000 fans. And after all of those hours that you put in to playing basketball, you want to actually perform in front of people and have people see you play. So that's where I ended up going to Iowa State. That year I had to sit out. That was still part of the NCAA rules at that time, which they've just kind of switched over in the last couple of years. But I sat out that year. That year I actually ended up tearing my ACL. So there was a couple of hurdles for me to get through. So between the torn ACL and really trying to mentally get back my jump shot from the 3-point line was kind of a 3-year process for me that finally I was really able to overcome my junior and senior year. So that's a little bit of insight there.
So then you end up as the 2005 Iowa State Female Athlete of the Year. That is quite a legacy. How did you get to that point?
Yeah,
knowing what was constantly going on in your mind as it pertained to your gameplay.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I look back on is that, you get to see some of everyone's awards, or, just even thinking in social media life, how everything looks really nice. Well, there's a lot of background stories that are happening for everyone out there. And I always believe in really looking behind and seeing what kind of strategy and mindset people are having. And so to circle back real quick to me not being able to shoot that shot and really kind of having to step back from, whether it's a jump shot or a set shot. And so I had to literally clear all of that out. And I should say about 15 years of practicing basketball. What ended up happening before my senior year is I went right underneath the rim, back like I was in third grade, and just started shooting with one hand only. And so you're talking right under the rim for all you basketball shooters. So I went under the rim, and then I would just take a step back, and I would only do that one-handed for the entire summer before my senior year. What ended up happening is before then, I couldn't really shoot the basketball that well from the three-point line. And I had set in my mind a couple years prior that I was going to be in the ESPN three-point shootout contest. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I just had this vision that I was going to be on the ESPN three-point shootout, which they have every year during the Final Fours. And so that summer I worked on shooting the three, and I really kind of needed to be a better asset to the team. Like I needed to perform better, and I needed to have a bigger impact than I had had my junior and sophomore year. So throughout that practice, literally cleaning the slate, starting from scratch, I was able to shoot about 50% from the three-point line. At one point, I led the nation in three-point percentage for Division I. And then I did get the call towards the end of the year that I had made the three-point shooting contest for ESPN that year. It was in St. Louis for the men's Final Four. And I was just so excited because it had taken a journey of 3 years and a lot of mental work and a lot of vision creating the new shot, and also to be able to propel our team to the NCAA tournament and have such a great, successful year for the program.
So then you leave college and you get recruited and drafted into the WNBA. What does that look like in the climate that you were moving into? I mean, I know that the WNBA recently has gotten a lot of just fanfare based on the amount of people who are pro women's sports and loud and proud women's sports. So how has that atmosphere surrounding the WNBA changed since you were playing?
Oh my gosh, it's so incredible to see so many people be supportive of the WNBA, even the US women's national soccer team, tennis. I mean, you name it, people are taking a look at women's sports and really making an impact. They're role models. Even Kobe Bryant and his family was such a huge supporter of women's basketball. And so it's changed dramatically from when I was there. I mean, even when I was growing up in high school, I was looking at players that were in the ABL, which was before the WNBA. So it was still somewhat new, but just still such a dream. So I had that great dream senior season for myself and the team, just such great success to be able to make the NCAA tournament, which was a goal of all of my teammates and I. And then I got the call that I was drafted 30th by the Sacramento Monarchs, which for the most part, they really liked that because I was such a great shooter, and I had to giggle to myself about how many hours that took and how much, change of a mindset that was, the last couple of years at Iowa State to be able to shift my shot. And so when I was drafted, I actually was still injured. I had a stress fracture in my ankle, which kind of dated back to a torn ACL and then a torn plantar fasciitis and then other injuries. So it's just part of the game, to overcome. So I wasn't able to participate that year, but I came back the second year and was able to, participate and, played in many cool venues like Madison Square Garden, which was just a dream to be, I grew up watching so many NBA players play there. So to be able to have some great moments like that, it was just a dream come true. And to be able to see where it's evolved to now, and the respect and the television that everybody's getting between women's sports, it's so profound. And I think it's only just the beginning.
So let's take a step back and talk about how you became an All-American, both athletic and academic. Because those are some mighty fine honors as well.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Since I was very young, it was always about goal setting for me. And I really always looked at the end. And when you're a kid, it's really easy to look at the end of middle school or the end of high school or the end of college of like where you want to be. And so for me, that was, my sister was a salutatorian in high school, which is like over a 4-point GPA. And I was like, well, if she can do it, I can do it. There's no doubt. And, there's always that competitive drive. I believe with athletes that if you're great in one thing, you really try your all in a lot of different avenues. And for me, that was school. I wanted to be great. And like I mentioned, my dad was an elementary school principal. So we had that educational background already there, already set for us. And just one of those things that I loved to learn. I always loved, getting my hands into anything. So whether it was science or language or reading and writing different types of language, those are probably my main highlights because I was a communications and business major at Iowa State. But I loved learning just as much as I could and put my goals and intentions in just as much as I did with basketball. Because as you can see, basketball doesn't last forever.
So then, what was your first experience with the WNBA? I mean, you had been drafted. Where did you go from there? Was it just kind of trial by fire, or were there steps in place to prepare you for professional basketball?
No, so once I was drafted, you had a couple of weeks and then I was sent off to Sacramento. And so that was, for the preseason camp. And like I mentioned, I was injured, so I wasn't able to fully participate, but I was able to hang out and watch practice and, sit with the coaches and other teammates and watch everything and be out there for about a month before I was let go because again, I couldn't really, fully participate.
So let's also talk about the WNBA salary cap. How has that changed, and how has, with the uptick in people watching and sponsorships surrounding professional women's basketball, how has the landscape of pay changed?
Well, the landscape of pay has changed so much, even from those years that I was there. But what I think the biggest difference is right now, it's very hard, apples and oranges compared to any type of men's sports. I mean, there's just no comparison of what men get paid, whether you're looking at NBA to WNBA or whether you're looking at professional men's soccer to women's soccer and the pay, it's not even comparable yet. Do I think we're getting closer on our way? Yes. But one of the spaces that I believe that women have really taken off is the branding and the sponsorships. And that's really one of the spaces they are going to be able to elevate. And, then you start seeing them on commercials and on TV and across social media platforms with paid sponsorships. And I think that's really where the women have honed in. But as far as actual salary to salary, we've got a long way to go for women's sports.
So let's talk about brand management for professional athletes, because there are a lot of ways that you can go incredibly wrong. But there are also a lot of ways that you can start yourself off on a really successful ride. What are some ways that current athletes, whether they're in high school or college, trying to cultivate their brand, what are some steps that they can do to start that journey?
Well, yeah, what I've noticed the most is, a lot of players right now that were in college and now professional sports are really upticking in their social media presence and their partnerships that they're creating with other brands. But where we're going to see the biggest impact is the next 5 to 10 years, where kids have grown up with Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and they've been on them since they've been in the 4th and 5th and 6th grade, showing them in the gym doing dribbling drills and practicing nonstop and wearing their Nikes or wearing their Pumas, whatever that looks like. But starting at that young age of really developing themselves as a brand is one of the biggest things. And I even see that in business. So, I work in cybersecurity right now. I've worked in various different business avenues since since I've been in athletics. But still, you go with you. You are the brand. That's what I've learned the most is, you can make yourself stand out no matter what business you're in. And because you have so many unique traits. So whether it's athletics or business or any type of industry that you're looking at, you are the brand, and what you bring to the table and how you make an impact and what you're interested in the world really does matter. And you really bring your voice to that. Anything is really possible that way.
So, how can you translate the sport mindset that you've grown up with, I've grown up with, so many people who have grown up playing sports? How can you translate that go-getter mindset into a career in business?
Well, it's such a great question. So after the WNBA, I worked in TV color commentary for a while. And I absolutely loved that because I was still close to the sport. And surprisingly, it gave me a whole new different perspective that I had never even really thought about. So as a player, you're out there playing the game. As a coach, you're out there kind of, helping people figure out which way to go and making the strategy. And as the commentator, you're out there giving everyone a storyline, and you're really kind of describing what's happening and also sharing the players and the coach's story out there. So I absolutely loved it. It was like a whole new third perspective of what sport really looked like. So I love that I've been able to have my hands in every little angle of athletics, which has been phenomenal. But at that point in time, I really looked around and I was like, I have done so much with basketball and I know a lot about basketball. But what do I want to learn next? What new skill set can I create and really kind of challenge myself with? And that's what I really looked at. And I looked into business. So I got into the medical world for a while. So medical sales. And then I was able to translate that, which was a super fun, very still goal oriented, with an athletic mindset. You have a quota by the end of the year and let's go and get it. And you've got a team of people that you're working with there too. And then the next piece I really looked at is I liked that idea, but waking up and selling medical devices just didn't inspire me. Having people safe was inspiring, but the actual device and what I was talking about wasn't. And so then I really kind of looked at what I had already created between athletics and business. And then I got into consulting. And so what consulting was we still need high performance. We still need people to perform at a high level and work within teams. And it really blended my background of athletics and business and also that psychology mindset of creating a goal out there in the future and then creating the steps to go get it. And that's really where I found my niche of being able to still have the passion from athletics and performance, but working with teams and people and getting them all moving and aligned on the same goal at the same time.
So I think that and we talked about this in our pre-interview as well, you have consistently gone from fast-paced environment to fast-paced environment. And is there anything other than the speed at which you have to process that you found similar between all of the ventures that you've been through?
Can you ask me that one more time? Because that was a great question. I just want to make sure I got it.
So I was just saying that everything that you've done so far has been so fast-paced, and there are deadlines you have to meet and people that you have to coordinate with. And that fast-paced environment has translated out of sport into what you've been drawn to post-career. So what do you think is the commonality between those specific parts of your life?
Okay, great. Let me think about that just for a second.
Another loaded question.
But... No, that was great. I just was looking at exactly where it was. So one of the common themes that I had throughout playing sports and business and just having a career and where I wanted to be in life was really kind of the methodology of reverse engineering. And so there's an old story of the NASA engineers when Kennedy said, we're going to the space, or we're going to go to the moon. And everybody in NASA is like, we don't know how to get to the moon. And so they had to figure out a brand new path for themselves. And instead of working with the materials that they already knew, they did that for a while of trying to get to space. Well, they can't fly an airplane there. They actually said, okay, what if we're on the moon and we have to come back from the moon? We got to bring these men back, right? And so that's the kind of philosophy that I've really been able to do with my career and life is like, all right, I'm already out here 2 years in advance. I'm Ann O'Neill of 2024, 2025. And then I stand there and I look back and I start thinking about what are the skill sets I want to learn? Who are the people I want to be around? What impact do I want to have? And that kind of methodology has really, really made a difference for me mapping out my career. Just like when I said I was kind of like, okay, I've done athletics, what's next? Is that methodology of standing out in the future and looking backwards to be able to create those next steps. I had one of my own experiences where, between the pandemic and COVID, I was actually let go from one of the consulting companies that had to cut about 3/4 of our staff at the time. And this was back in the fall. And at that time, I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to create another blank slate for myself. So instead of just jumping into the next opportunity or next consulting gig or whatever that looks like, to be able to, which is great to have a job and a 401k and a title, because who are you without a title, in this world? I really took a step back of really just being, okay, here's Ann again. I'm not Ann O'Neill basketball or Ann O'Neill consulting or Ann O'Neill this business. I'm just Ann right now. And that's been a really big thing for me to learn, of not attaching myself to too many titles, because it really gives me the freedom to create newly. And so I was able to do that, of being like, where do I want to be in 2023? And so I was able to find this job that still basically is all about a linguistic mindset and a psychology of consulting within the cybersecurity industry. And that's where I wanted to be, as it's definitely growing. Like the digital speed and cybersecurity in general is growing. But without that time frame to let the dust settle and really stand in that space and start looking newly at things, I don't believe that I would have had the path that I've had, like throughout every little different career and different city that I've lived in, without really saying, where do I want to be? I mean, I can even give you that example of, I grew up my whole life in the Midwest, and I am not a fan of the snow, the gray days, the cold. And I was like, where can I go? And I'm like, I'm going to the beach. I wanted to be a whale trainer when I was a kid, very, very young kid. And I was like, I'll at least go to the water. And so I came down here to South Florida. I live in Miami now, but I've spent time in Fort Lauderdale, and I love the sun. I love the water, and I love being able to see all the sea turtles and manatees and everything out there. So in some ways, I feel like I fulfilled that dream, even from those years past. But always being able to clear the time of being like, where am I and in the future, and start working backwards. That has been the biggest theme that I've been able to create, whether it's within my work and for myself.
So that leads me into a talk about athlete identity. Who are you after sport? Because I was actually just having a conversation earlier about, once you leave sport, most people will jump right into something else because they've been so consumed time-wise and thought process-wise with having to do something every single day, whether it's practice or mental conditioning. And then suddenly sports is over and they're like, oh, I have to fill this time with something. But you did exactly the opposite. It sounds like this was well needed time to kind of figure everything out, because you no longer had a title, like athletes no longer have sports.
It's such a great conversation. I got to tell you, I've had this conversation with many of my friends who are athletes, and even parents of athletes. It's something that everyone goes through, So since I've been about 11 years old, I was always Ann O'Neill basketball. And that stayed around for quite a while. And then it would be Ann O'Neill, Iowa State. And so, the fact that I can do that now throughout my career is because I learned it without knowing what to do. So back when I finished playing, even in the WNBA and Iowa State, and finished coaching, I really had to look at, like, who is Ann O'Neill without any of these titles? It's one of the biggest learning lessons I've had. I shouldn't say lesson, I should say experiences, to really be able to stand and start looking around. And so one of the experience I had is that I was somewhat of a one-dimensional person at that time. I loved basketball so much, and I loved the school. I loved team. I loved all of those things, but they all kind of fell into one dimension of who I was, because it was Iowa State, whether it was athletics or whether it was basketball. So I really considered myself at that time a one-dimensional person. And once those go away, those titles, you start seeing the world in color again. And I call it a 3D human. It's actually a name that I've trademarked, because as a 3D human, you're looking and curious about everything, almost back to those times when you are a kid and you're trying all the different sports and all the different outdoor activities that you can find. You're just constantly curious. And at the end of that basketball time was the space for me to start looking again of what was interesting. Like how I said, I ended up moving to Miami. Well, I love the sun. I love the ocean. Why wouldn't I go check it out there? And just like I, mentioned about cybersecurity, I was like, well, I love performance and I love business. How can I mold those together and really start to create from scratch in a world that isn't just one title, one job, and that's it? So at any point in our lives, I really believe there are things that we can get attached to, whether it is a title, especially in the business world, and especially in the athletic world. You've always been something. And what does it look like when you are a bunch of different things and you've brought yourself into being a 3D human with so many different interests and such a dynamic personality and charismatic way of living? It's a new life, because anything really is possible with that mindset.
So how do you think that athletes who are coming off of that athletic identity can start to reinvent themselves? I mean,
Oh man, you're asking some good questions.
What does that process entail? I mean, when you step away from athletics and you suddenly have all of this time to fill and all of this mental capacity that no longer involves sport, what do you lean on in order to get yourself going in some direction, any direction, again, that is not sport?
Such an incredible question. I first would look at kind of the preempt stage. So while you're actually in the sport is the time to really be looking around. That's kind of why we always end up looking at those goals. Like I said, the end of middle school, the end of high school, the end of college, and then whatever the playing days are for any athlete after that are going to be capped. But what are all the other experiences and interests that you have? So for me, I played volleyball and soccer and so many different other interests, but they all kind of fell to the wayside as my interest in basketball grew and grew. And for me, the one thing I'd look back, or if I have kids in the future, is really looking at, continue to look at that balance all the time. There's so many different skill sets that you can learn and pick up during your time of also being very committed to a sport or being very committed to a study, whatever that looks like. And then when that time comes, you kind of have things to lean back on, and you have people or mentors. That probably would be one of the biggest areas of advice I'd give is really seeking out people that you might even just be kind of interested in, like, whether it's oceanography, of maybe being able to set up a Zoom and talking with somebody in that, or journalism, I'm interested in that, and talking to trying to grab 10 or 15 minutes of your favorite journalists, and then just being able to be in contact with them where you have a network and you really kind of start piecing together like those puzzle pieces and a hologram almost. So not like a flat puzzle, but more of a hologram where things are, again, 3D. You know how some of those games you used to play when you're a kid, and you really kind of get to start to build yourself up as a multidimensional 3D person that way. So whether it be scheduling time to take the interest, and then also the time of reaching out, because people have a lot of interesting stories out there that you can learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the second that you lose sport, a lot of people feel like they lose who they are completely. And there's so much more that they can figure out about themselves that sometimes goes completely untouched and unnoticed. So what are some ways that you can cultivate those sides of you that you may not have realized were as present as they are?
I've actually done some of this work where I have looked back and journaled about what were some of my greatest interests when I was a kid. you know, even when I was playing basketball, but there was always other little interest surrounds before I got really committed. And most of my time was spent in school or basketball, because that was just the one thing that I did, you know, throughout high school. But what were some of my other interests? And I look back and I was like, I had a quote journal back then, you know, where I'm at today, I still have a quote journal. I love reading. I love listening to different podcasts or people speak. I love learning from philosophers and like different types of psychology and neuroscience. I love animal psychology. So many things that I loved when I was a kid are still present for me today. And that was one of the biggest things I looked back on, is to be able to say, what were the things I was dreaming about before I was so committed as an athlete, which is a great place to be. But there was also other things that sparked interest that I'd love to spend my time on, whether that was meditation or philosophy or quotes or, you know, traveling. All these different things showed up for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, years later, I'm still interested in these. And now I can start diving into them more and more. But sometimes with those blinders on, I think of like the Kentucky Derby with the horses, and they've got one path. That's what a lot of athletes feel like, and what, you know, where their goal is. But once you take those blinders off and you start seeing the world around you, you're like, oh yeah, I was interested in that. I did like that person and what their experience was, or I liked that city when we went around and explored, or I loved that piece of art. Just kind of starting to see where your interests were at least a little bit curious. And curiosity is one of the main foundations that I look at in my life, because when I'm curious, I start to discover more about myself and I start to see how big the world is.
That was a great answer. So let's talk more about the process of reverse engineering your goals, because I thought that was so interesting when you said that in the pre-interview, and I wrote it down to talk about. And we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but can you talk about the process of picking a spot in the future and then working backward, almost like undoing a puzzle, like a maze, trying to get back to where you are currently?
Oh, great. So the pieces as you edit, the piece of the 3-point shooting is a big one for that, about reverse engineering. And then I shared a little bit about NASA, because that is a true story of how they ended up building and were able to get to the moon, because they didn't have any of the equipment. It's like doing something brand new. So you ask me again what you want me to say. You want me to talk about reverse engineering a little bit?
Yeah. So what is the first step once you figure out this point in the distant future or not so distant future?
Right.
How do you then work back until you get to where you are right now?
Okay. So thinking about the future and reverse engineering, so many times we create from what we already know. And what we already know is the past, what we've always done, what we've eaten in the morning, the route that we take to work, the schedule that we go by. It's all a pattern of past behavior. And why reverse engineering works, or I would say even creating from the future, is because you get to look at something in a new way that's completely a blank slate. And you even get to see yourself that way. And you get to fill in everything that you like. So what works for me is pointing out, like we just mentioned, whether it's 3 years down the line, I'm like, all right, here's Anne O'Neill in her sneakers in 2024. And I look back and I'm like, where do I want to live? Who are the people I want to hang out with? What are the skill sets I want to learn? What city would I like to live in? And it even can get down into like very little goals. And like I said, it can even be in 3 weeks from now, I'm standing here. What have I accomplished? What books have I read? What kind of workouts did I do? Who did I hook up with and talk to on Zoom? You know, you can even do that in the short term. But what I love the most is the psychology behind it. It is not coming from the past where everything is a pattern of sameness. Sometimes I call it the same. I'm living the same. But when you're out here and you're creating new and it's a blank slate, you have a blank canvas to paint any color of picture on. Sometimes they talk about it like that. There's a philosophy where you don't paint over a Mona Lisa, right? And that's what the Mona Lisa's already painted. That's in the past. But you start with a blank white canvas in the future, and you can paint any kind of colors that you like and any kind of picture that you want for that future. So it's really kind of coming from the mindset and the mind frame of everything is new and everything is possible. So what can I build from that?
That was another perfect answer. So
How's
how
my
do you,
face? Is it a little white on here?
no, you're good.
Okay.
How do you continue to exponentially grow toward your goal consistently? So now you have your goal in mind. You've reverse engineered it. You know where to go, but how do you maintain that consistent growth toward your goal?
Well, okay, so it's such a great question. It's just like the vision of how people became great athletes or great painters is they have a vision and then you start working each day, hour by hour, minute by minute, little skill set by little skill set. And that's what it looks like for me is I have that vision of where I want to be, the skills I want to learn, the impact I want to make, the people I want to hang out with. And then it looks like, all right, well, what do I have to do? Well, I have to make that phone call. I gotta get up and go work out. It's not actually just saying I am that thing. It is the action and the steps that you're taking to create, whether it's, going to do a meditation and actually being in the meditation, and being in the workout. It's the psychology of beingness of one thing at a time. So that it's a little bit of a Zen type of psychology. Phil Jackson, who coached the Bulls and the Lakers back in the day, was very big on that. But you're always visualizing yourself in that future state. But when you're actually at work, you are being in the moment of the tiny task that you're up to. And so that's what really works for me. So when I say I'm going to meditate, when I say I'm going to work out, when I say I'm going to study, when I say I'm going to connect with friends, when I say I'm going to create and write, those are the things that I'm doing at that time. And I'm really laser focused on that moment. But you're still doing those daily tasks that all add up to that one masterpiece that you're making in that time frame. And guess what? Things go off course and then you just recreate anew all the time. All the time they go off course.
Yeah, I was just talking, I think a couple interviews ago, we were talking about visualization. And I was talking to a downhill skier who ski races. And I mean, they go downhill at like 40 miles an hour. It's incredibly reckless from the outside looking in. And he said, well, yeah, it probably is reckless, but I have visualized this hill and this course so many times that it doesn't seem reckless because I have total control of what I'm doing. And I just thought that that was so interesting because when you're seeing these skiers on the Olympics and you can't you can't see yourself doing that, but they're totally at home because they have such an idea and such an understanding of what's next, and they're just living in the flow moment, and that's when everything just seems to work. And I think that that's exactly what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, I was able to hone that in with basketball because, after so many hours, so many repetitions, you actually could tell if you were going to make the shot. I could, anyway, I'll speak for myself, the way that the ball would hit my hands before I would shoot it. That's how many times you had done that. So you were just in kind of a reaction mode, but you already were 3 steps before your physical body. So that's almost what it looks like. And I went to the gym recently and caught myself in that experience. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it looks like in real life. But this is what I used to do with basketballs. You toss the ball out, I could feel it in my hands and I knew if it was going to go in before I even shot the shot. So that was, there's a neuroscience called Joe Dispenza, and I study with him, as in I love his work. I'm actually going to an event of his in July in Denver, Colorado, to really kind of hone in on the brain heart coherence and meditation. But it's, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more that you visualize, if you're an athlete, the ball going through the hoop, finishing the downhill ski, whatever that looks like, and as an athlete, and then as a human, being that rock star CEO or being on the TED Talk stage, whatever that looks like for you, but seeing it over and over again, and the confidence that exudes, the visualization of what you want for that future state, little by little, you start becoming it because your brain starts to create that future before you're actually living it.
Yeah, I think that in sports is a great example of the power of visualizing goals, because you essentially visualize them in every single possible way. You visualize every single way you can successfully do it and every possible small detail that could go wrong in order for you to fail. And I think that that is so translatable outside of sport as well. And I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Yes, I had a couple of those experiences in sport that were just so profound that I was able to see. And then I've definitely seen it in my career and life after that. One of the great games that we played at Iowa State, we were playing the number one team in the nation. It was Texas Tech. They were undefeated and they were playing in Ames, Iowa on our home court. And we had all decided that we were going to win the game, and we were not ranked, kind of an average team at best. But we had this great strategy. Our coach had a great game plan. And you could just feel in the room that everyone was like, we're going to win this game. And I knew for sure we were going to win. I really didn't know how, but I just thought we're going to win. And if you look back on the highlights, people were making shots and playing defense on the next level of that they had ever played before. Every single person in motion, and we ended up winning that game. So when you set your sights out and you visualize it and you continue to believe in what it is and see it, anything's possible. And it's the same thing for what we're up to now in life and career, even beyond athletics, because most athletes have at least one or two of those moments where they're like, I saw it, I lived it, I was already the one in the winner's circle. I hear so many of those great stories and I get goosebumps. I saw the gold medal, I had it on, whatever that looks like. And it is so profound, that work, because they already knew that they had it and then they just had to go do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the step that a lot of people find very difficult, but the athletes as a collective group, I don't think that step intimidates them as much as it does people who haven't been through the athletic mindset.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Say one more time what you were saying. Sorry, somebody messaged me on my work email.
No, I was just saying that when you're faced with difficulty outside of sport, athletes handle it much differently than people who haven't participated.
It's hard for me to comment on that because I'm an athlete. So I only know it from my experience, right? And I am so honor everyone's experiences, because even if they went through something in their childhood or their university or whatever that looks like, everyone has their ways of creating what happens next. One of the great things I always loved, like I said, learning about, and I was able to study it, was the study of ontology, which doesn't get a big enough rap sheet compared to psychology. But ontology is the study of being. And so when you think of being, it's like to bring forth. That's like the origin of the word. I'm a huge nerd and I love finding out the actual root of words, because when it comes down to it, we pretty much have language and pictures that go with language. And so I think for athletes, one of the biggest impacts that they have is that they are actually being a winner, and they're being a basketball player, they're being a championship runner. And then all they have to do is go out and actually do it. So it's actually the beingness that comes first, and then the doing of whatever they need to do, because they've done all those little things while nobody's been watching. And I think that's one of the differences that we even look at with reverse engineering. I already am this thing. Now I got to figure out the little pieces to do to be able to create that.
So I think that I have concluded all of my questions. Is there anything else that I missed that you would like to add? Anything that a question I haven't asked, or some background information that you think I haven't touched on?
Oh man. Let me think real quick. Maybe. I did take some notes. We can talk a little bit maybe about because I felt like that, I mean, a lot of it is about me, but I can talk a little bit more about what has also made it work with all the people that have been around me. Do you want me to just kind of speak on that, or
Yeah, for
one of
sure.
those kind of things. So, because I was like, I was just trying to kind of create that for myself. So I've got a great story that either goes to like, there's both. There's one that's like about the band that played Ants Marching at Iowa State, or I can talk about Pat Summitt coming to a game and my parents and I taking like some like, what do you call them? Disabled kids home from that game.
Oh my goodness.
So I can talk
let's talk about the latter story.
the latter story. Okay, so you can time it in with some high school stories.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll try to set that up. So I'm like never great on cue, but I'll try. Okay. All right. So from a very young age, I grew up in a family that always cared about anyone that was around. And when I say anyone that was around, that everyone mattered. And that was a big learning lesson for me. So I had a story that goes back to my dad and I would go to the gym every single night during high school. And during my freshman year, for my birthday, he actually got me a key to the high school gym. I don't know how it happened, but it was so incredible because we would hang out with the janitor there all the time. You know, he would be the one shutting the lights on and off for us as we'd be in the gym. And so I had this key to the gym. Then I would go and hang out with the janitors there. They were the ones who literally saw me play probably the most basketball ever besides my parents. But by the time I would actually end up playing the high school games, they were always the people that I would high five on and off the court because they'd still have to be there, you know, clean up the gym afterwards and shut the lights off. But I'd always make sure to give them the biggest hug because without them, I don't even know if I would have been able to, you know, have the gym and the facility and really have like any of the created space that I was able to be so a part of without these janitors. So basketball and these guys really mattered to me. It was always a part of the thing. And then I have another experience where I had Pat Summitt show up to a game, and it's such a cool story because people know Pat Summitt's a legend in women's basketball. And so she flew in the middle of the week in a blizzard, of course, because that's what happens in Iowa in the wintertime, on a private jet, and her assistant, Mickey DeMoss, were at the game. I didn't even know it until the starting warmups that they were there. So we play this game. I don't really know what happened in the game or if we won or lost, whatever that looks like. I just knew they were there. I was like, that's awesome that she's there recruiting me. But after the game, it was such a bad blizzard. And I was talking to these people and all they wanted to know was like, to talk about Pat Summitt. And it didn't really matter. I waited till the very end to talk to my parents. And we had these two guys named Greg and Ryan who would come to every one of my home games. And they were mentally handicapped, older gentlemen, and they would take every stat and they would write everything down in these 3-ring notebooks. And then they'd want to talk to me about all the stats of all the teammates, all the players after every game. And they were just so great. And not to mention they'd call my house and leave messages from my parents. It was so funny. But that night they came out to, an away game that was about 20 miles out of town. And so they were there waiting. And at the very end, I'm walking out with my parents and there's this huge blizzard. And I'm just really excited to kind of get in the van and talk to my folks. And my parents invited Greg and Ryan to get in the van with us. And I was like, this is exactly what it's all about. Pat Summitt who, it's about the people who you always care about. So even the biggest fans like Greg and Ryan, they always made the biggest impact. And so I always would try to take a look. And I think even in my business career, it's the people who are in customer service that are sending you back an email, or, the person that's sweeping up the hospital as I was like walking through there. So always taking a look around the whole impact of all the people that are making things happen. That was also one of my big learning lessons at Iowa State. I said we played in front of those 10,000 fans. One of the biggest fans was our band. And one of my great teammates and I asked them if they could learn Ants Marching. It's a song by Dave Matthews, which we loved. It had a great drum beat in the beginning. And we're like, can you guys learn Ants Marching? And they go back. And then, the next game we come out, with 4 minutes left to go in the warm-ups, we hear the drum beat. It's really loud and you can hear it, and you can hear it a mile away if you know ants marching. And we all just went, woo! And they were so excited to be able to try to play this new song, and they fumbled through it, but we knew it was ants marching and we loved it. And then every game after that, they played it for our team, and all the girls on the team would scream for them, scream for the band. And they were so excited. They'd give us, one of those rock star things back. And then I came to a game about 10 years later, and the band was still playing ants marching. And I just always got that thing, like, just because you're the one on the court, there is a ton of people around you that are helping making the game important and a bigger sphere. So whether that's the janitors, whether it's people like Greg and Ryan, whether it's the band who shows up, or the people that are the trainers or managers. And in business, you find these people all over too, even the people that work my front door of my condo building. Everybody helps make life easy and great. And you just have to continue to look out for all those teammates that you don't even consider teammates out there. How was that? I did that on the spot, and I actually just blew through all of them. So there you go.
I was going to say, that was both of your anecdotes.
Yeah, it was like a couple. Well, it is. I do think of that. That's why the people downstairs, even the Amazon, or the guys downstairs know my. They're like, we know your voice, we know who you are. I give them like candy and stuff. That's a big deal. So, yeah. So that's probably some of my stuff.
Teamwork goes so far beyond your sport. I mean, there's teamwork in work environments constantly, and there's teamwork in daily life as well. And I think that that's one of the things that you learn early on how to excel in if you're in a sports atmosphere.
Yes, absolutely. It's it's the teammates, it's the trainers, it's managers, and you start to see those, and some of those kind of pop out to you. They're like, man, they're taping my ankle every day. They're here every day. But then sometimes it's the people that are doing the music that I don't ever get to meet, upstairs. But it's what the pandemic has been able to show us too, is all these people that make things move and work together. There is kind of this rhythm of people that are all doing jobs that we don't always get to see in a transparent world. But if you start to look around, you see them, they show up, and you see what kind of an impact they're making to make your life easier and to make your life great. And so athletics does that, but it's in the daily life too.
So I think that concludes our interview.
Okay, you nailed it.
Crushed it.
Okay, did we do well? Okay, great.
Yes, we did. So
okay, good.
I'm going to stop recording right now.